This is time for committee comment for items not on the agenda. Does anyone on the committee have any comments? No, seeing none, we have open public comment for items not on the agenda. Anyone from the public wishing to make a comment for items not on the agenda?
None.
Okay, we need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion to adopt.
Thanks, Russ. Need a second?
That
Second.
was Stephanie. Oh,
Oh, she
Martha.
moved her lips.
So Martha?
yes.
Okay. Okay, Chairman Jeff Duncan,
Aye.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Aye.
Martha Merriam,
Aye.
and Russ Kelly.
Aye.
Okay, now do we have any public comment on the consent agenda? The consent agenda is the minutes from May 5th, 2021. Seeing no public comment on consent agenda, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move.
Thank you.
Second.
Welcome.
Got
Russ, your second?
Yes.
Okay, Jeff Duncan,
aye.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Aye.
Martha Merriam,
Aye.
Russ Kelly.
Aye.
Okay, so now we're here for the main committee matters committee. Wait a second. We're going to hand it over to Mary Beth and Melinda.
Can you see my screen?
Yep,
Trying to make it big. There
there
it goes.
you go.
Okay. So at this time, we'll turn it over to Melinda. I will be operating the PowerPoint, and as we review the element, I'll be doing that too.
We can
Do you
move
see?
ahead.
Do you see my little chat boxes and participant boxes?
No,
Okay.
no.
But if I put them over here, you do? No. Okay, good. Okay, Melinda, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, we can move to the agenda slide. And first, I wanted to thank everyone for this comments that have been submitted so far. Martha, really appreciate the paleo stuff, and realized that part of my problem was I was looking at my dad's old geo maps, which are from like the 60s, and didn't see anything different in them. And I'm glad you pointed it out, because certainly more work has been done on defining different units in the area. And looking at the little old Sacramento sheet I had, I realized it's archaic now. So those are going to be retiring. And so it was nice to get all the maps, but it's lots more work has been done on defining different units or soil series. And so I shouldn't be using the one from, I think, about 1960. So we'll retire that now. I also wanted to thank Jean for her sending us the article about the bridge. And that was really, really a nice find on having so much more information about the resource, and sort of, again, leads into the other part of it is an interesting spot. And it is, I went and visited and found that I now recognize the attraction for it, whether Caltrans likes it or not. It's a nice spot. So again, those will be put into in the next couple days. I'll start addressing comments and fixing things up to address the comments. But what I did also recognize, though, we can go to the next slide. Listening now to everyone's comments about, and there's a variety of comments, but it's again, everybody had their own focus on what they thought was important, what sources were important. And I think that's really kind of the key to putting this together, is listening to that. And again, part of what we're going to get to in the goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures is a new one, which is looking at the goal of preserving the historic character of the town by, addressing the additional implementation measure for doing historic research and using these sources that have been mentioned. And I tried to list what I could, and I've now found a couple more that I want to add to it myself. So it's sort of an open-ended category. Some people have done research, and I know we've mentioned a couple people that are very knowledgeable, and we've had some people comment at the meeting. But I mean, the research is sort of this open-ended topic that anybody can participate in and can be connected to, and can add to our knowledge. I mean, somebody could write a short little article in the paper that tells you all about some interesting murder or some crime that happened in the region. And I think all that stuff is it's sort of like this wide, a lot has been done, but there's still a lot more to be done. And I work up here in El Dorado Hills. We had a little town called Clarksville, and we set up a little historical society. And it's the same sort of thing of finding something that people are interested in and then doing something with it and getting people to get excited about the local history and to write more about it and to research more about it. And anybody, including the kids in the high school or can help with this. And so I think, so that's why I've added this additional item, and it may not be the right wording, but again, I think it's something that it's worth working with. So I guess we can go to goals, policies, objectives, policies, and implementation. Okay. And Christy, is this the version you wanted up?
Yeah, and Mary Beth, if you scroll, just go all the way to the end and then back it up a little bit. This is all the other conservation topics.
There we go.
Okay, there we are.
Also, could you expand it, Mary Beth, so I could read it?
Whoops.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so that is, and again, Christy, the order, since you've done some of these, the order is to read through line by line and talk about it.
Yeah, if we can skip over the introduction. If anyone has comments on that, they can send it in. But let's get to the goals and policies and all the meat of the
The meat of the matter there.
Mm-hmm. So keep scrolling.
There we go.
Okay, and again, we've got it down to the main goal of this element is to preserve the historic character of the town. So is there anybody that wants to add to that, change that, or is that an acceptable goal?
Melinda, what about celebrating the town? Somehow not only preserving, but celebrating the history of the town. Because a lot of the stuff that has been talked about is that celebration of history.
That could certainly be, well, preserving it, and also, I don't know if celebrate's necessarily the right word, but something to do with, sharing it. And there's probably some better, I know what you mean, but I to share, to not only preserve, but to make it accessible, to share it, to, and again, maybe somebody else can jump in with a better term for that, or additional terms.
Actually, we have a interloper as an attendee. I'm wondering, Mary Beth, can you make Michelle available? I have a feeling she might have a great term.
Michelle, you just need to unmute. And welcome to this meeting.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yay.
So what do you need from me?
We talk about in the goal here to preserve the historic character of the town, but much of the discussion in this committee, like Melinda was saying, sharing the history of the town. I was thinking celebrating the history of the town, which, the Maidu, the Miwok, no, I guess it is the Maidu in this area, the gold mining, the agricultural history of the community. I'm just wondering if you have a term that we could put into this goal or create a new goal to represent that, because I think the reason this is a favorite committee, I think people are just loving learning about.
Right. Yeah, so I'm sitting here, kind of lurking and taking notes, and that was one of the notes that no, that's one of the notes that I took, which was that really jumped out at me, that people said this was the favorite committee and they were watching it on YouTube, because they're probably not watching the circulation committee on YouTube. So I think that is really meaningful. And actually, I think that all of the meetings that I've been to so far, everyone does mention historic preservation, but we tend to really focus on infrastructure for that. But I think that there are all kinds of interesting ways to think about how we celebrate and pursue and reflect our histories. And I think that sometimes we focus too much just on the tangible. And I'll give you kind of a weird example of that. So in Spokane, Washington, I was doing work there. This was ages ago. And I was really interested that in the downtown, a lot of people said they wanted to see more diversity reflected. And in that area, you have a lot of Native American tribes. So I started talking to some of the tribes, and I started talking to the city. And everyone at the city was like, well, we're building a museum to the past. And then that was kind of it, right? It was a structure and it was this physical thing. And there wasn't this connection to like what are other ways that we can celebrate, this connection to the Native American community that's entirely around the city. And is that through looking at, modern Salish programs to become fluent in the language and music and other things that's being published in Salish, like this link between the present and the past, and that it's not just this, kind of moldering building that's sitting off to the side, and that's just how we think of the past. I love that idea of how does the past get reflected in the present? What do we learn from the past? So I think it should be this much more dynamic thing, and I don't think it should just be connected to building. So I was super excited to just hear what you guys were discussing initially, and I was making notes about it. So I kind of feel like it should be a separate goal. I think that historic preservation of buildings is a very specific goal that is very much tied to market conditions. And as we talked about in some of the other committees, a whole bunch of stuff that weighs into development challenges. And so I think there are things we can do about that, absolutely, within your, these implementation and objective setting that you're doing. But I think in terms of I would want to see it be a separate goal, honestly, is thinking about how you're more fluidly integrating and interacting with and reflecting the past, and but in ways that are also relevant today, right? Like it doesn't have to just be this thing stuck in stone. And I don't know, I would love for communities to think more about this stuff. It's not just about a plaque on a building, right? So super exciting conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also the term interpreting needs to be in there somewhere too, because we're not just, putting out dry facts. It's interpreting how people lived, what they did, lifestyle. So it's kind of all of those things: interpreting, celebrating. It can be, and it can be in performance art too. I mean, we have a committee up here that does just started doing Saving the Graves, and they have a big event at the cemetery. So not that you have a cemetery to do it in, but I mean, there are things that can happen too. So I think there's a chance here for, adding another goal perhaps.
And I would actually add to that, Anders, the idea, part of what the reason that Loomis incorporated, and we were calling it in the civic identity work almost like a defensive incorporation, was, around this idea of also preserving, some things or having these connections to rural lifestyle and to not just become an exurban place. And so I think there are really positive and interesting ways to both celebrate and acknowledge that, but also reflect that in modern and, interesting ways. So to me, I just think it's so much broader than just a building. So yeah, I think it's exciting, and it'd be fun to see something that speaks to that a little more deeply.
Mary Beth, could you try typing in a new goal, and it will have to be refined, but I kind of like the idea of the reflection, but it's almost to record and share the history of Loomis, the long term. I would leave that one there. Add a new one. Add goal H2. There you go. Thank you.
I'm not in track changes mode. Oh,
I think we'll.
oh yeah, there we go.
There it is. Yeah. So it's to and Melinda, what you were saying at the beginning is not only to record, but to continue to explore the history of Loomis and provide opportunities for that. And then from the history, celebrate it, reflect on it, and use it as a guidance to the future of the community. And I think there's a lot in there.
And not all history. I mean, some history is stuff you want to celebrate and reflect. Some history is stuff that's not great and you need to learn from.
Well,
right?
that's true. To
So,
celebrate,
yeah.
to learn from it. Like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to, I think being authentic means, warts and all.
Yeah.
Well, I thought about the term honoring the historic character of the town, but not all of the history, maybe. It's like-
No.
Well, I like the comment about learn from, because
Yes.
that is really important.
It is.
Well, we had the fire of 1912 and it burned half the town down. And
Yeah.
we did have a fire festival at one point back in the 80s. And it basically helped tell what happened in town. Of course, then not too long after that, they burned my fruit shed down.
Yeah.
Uh,
The Blue Anchor. Yeah.
Yeah.
They misinterpreted the
You
fire
know-
festival.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story though, actually, so I think, honestly, and this comes back to some of the marketing and branding work that we talked about, but I think this is really true. And I think the places and the people and the things we connect to are things that are authentic. So it is the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the, not sort of self-idealizing. And that story is, it's just interesting, right? It's a great illustration of how we forget things and we relearn things, and, and could almost do that through another fire celebration. So I love that idea of, that's an ongoing journey of discovery for a community to think about who they are, who they were, who they want to be. Like that's, that I really like, I think that really speaks to being a dynamic community, and especially if you can do that honestly.
I actually, in your second line, to preserve, enhance, discover, explore, and expand the history of Loomis.
And expand the what?
The history of Loomis. Or expand on, or.
And I have to just side note, I was listening to your chat at the beginning while you weren't sure if you had a quorum, and I was on a phone call with my mom who grew up in San Francisco, and she's in her mid to late 70s. So I was chatting with her right before I hopped on this, and I said, I got to go hop on a committee meeting in Loomis. And she's like, Loomis, I had a boyfriend whose family was from Loomis. So I discovered a Loomis connection tonight I didn't even know I had. So there you go.
Yeah.
I would say that's probably enough for Melinda and ourselves to kind of work on, but I think that's the goal that I've been hearing you guys talking about, And we've heard that also in the Parks and Recreation Committee and other committees.
Mhm.
I think expand on would be better than expand the history of the Loomis thing. although I guess we're expanding on the history right now, right?
Yes, we are.
Not here in this meeting, but
Yeah.
as we live our lives.
And the other thing, Jeff, you had said share. So somehow put the word share in there. Yeah. Melinda, I think we can wordsmith this later, but I think,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's good. I think, again, it's viewing it as an open-ended system, because you're never gonna, you won't finish. You'll find you run across a newspaper article that tells you.
Yeah.
Somebody was telling me about well, it's not right in Loomis, but the murder and the guy at Gold Hill, that was the guy laid in wait out in the bushes, and he was telling me this story. He knew the sheriff that was involved in it, and was telling me this great story about this horrendous crime that happened where, and so again, that's the kind of thing. I write a lot of murder history, so it was interesting.
yeah. I mean, one thing, Jeff, is that the mayor, you may want to consider that one day a year you have people come up and tell stories about Loomis. I mean, which would continue this committee and what has occurred on this committee of great stories being shared.
Yeah.
You get the idea.
At the
Yep.
library, we could have storytelling time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it's the good and the bad. I mean, my genealogy group does that, where we talk about famed citizens, and sometimes that's kind of ho-hum about people talking about grandpa from wherever in Missouri. And sometimes the more fun stories are like, oh yeah, my first cousin's in prison and did this and did this. And you're sort of like, whoa, that's amazing to talk about it. But I think,
Mary Beth, could you put the term learn from somewhere in that whole line of good things?
Mhm.
We can definitely just put it in anywhere, because I'm sure Melinda will wordsmith it into something cohesive.
Right.
But I think that expresses the ideas that we've been hearing. Sorry, Melinda, for
that's okay. We're all working on making it better. That's fine. Okay, and then again with an objective, and this is maybe too focused again, with a subjective of preservation of historic character through preservation of the significant buildings, districts, structures, sites, district, as well as the prehistoric sites. And again, although it's spoken to in, California state law, et cetera, and CEQA certainly, again, it is sort of, I don't know if that's, I've heard that people want to keep the old buildings as much as possible, but it's not possible to preserve everything. So that's why we have to sort of temper it a little bit through preservation wherever possible of significant buildings.
I think that builds directly with the goal H1, so I think that's a good objective.
Mm-hmm. So any comments here on this subjective?
Melinda, we're taking the approach, if nobody speaks, we assume consent and move forward.
Okay. You've been to these more than I have.
Ramona?
Ramona.
Yeah, I just want to see if there's a way we could add a little more teeth to the preservation where feasible. Let's see if I can find it here. I was looking at Orange.
That's in the implementation.
In the implementation, yeah, the city of Orange had something that stated it a little bit with a little bit more teeth to it. Let me see if I can find it. I'm kind of lost where I was at with this one from the city of Orange, but let me see where they phrased it. But anyway, it had a little more teeth to it than where possible. Like I said, I just like the wording a little bit more better because it was a little bit more forceful, I guess, if you want to think of it that way.
So I think you're right, Melinda, it goes into the implementation measure, because the objective and policy are pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Other than the word encourages, there's not a shall in there, but actively encourages is a action direction.
Yeah, I mean, feasible, it's everything in cultural resource stuff, and I've been doing this for a long, long time. It's that there's choices to be made. Sometimes a building is in such terrible, terrible shape that it's, and you have to do ADA, you have to do, there's so many things about getting it into there's a certain feasibility that does have to be here. I mean, you can't save every building, and there's some that are just too far gone. And again, my experience, of course, has been horrible, where people take down things that are perfectly good, and then do have to try with other ones that probably aren't worth the effort. So again, it's something that the town has to be strong in looking at. And I think it's going to tie into a little bit better with, like, let's look at what standards you have for what's important to you. I think that's the other side of what happens here is even, for example, the bridge isn't rated by Caltrans as being significant, but if you think it's significant here by your own standards that you set, then maybe that's where feasibility comes from too. I mean, it's again, it's tempered by what you determine is important to you. And I think all of these things are interrelated. Maybe we're not saying it the best way, but I think that's kind of like, you just don't randomly go out and say, well, I'm tearing this one down because I prefer a modern apartment building to sit there. It's up to the town to really actively work on stopping that kind of action. And so I don't know. And that's in the implementation measure there, when feasible. But what feasible, if you've got better wording, that's fine.
Well, and like I said, maybe this is jumping it a little too far forward because we don't actually have an inventory. That's why I wanted an inventory of the town to actually actively do the inventory, because then you can define, these are what we think are important, these are not, because maybe that's when you get to add the more teeth to it. Because the one for Orange, City of Orange is required that no permit for alteration or demolition of properties identified in the inventory as potentially historic resources shall be issued until alternatives are to demolition have been duly considered. So, kind of adds that extra hurdle of there won't be anything permitted until you've really shown that there is no other option. But again, it might be, that's probably a little bit farther ahead than where we are right now, because we don't have that inventory yet.
Right.
So I don't know if you can require something like that, where you might have to be a little bit more how the way we have it worded to.
Yeah, on the other hand.
Well, we might have to come back to this because we have the inventory further down now. So, but yeah, I think that's it. I mean, it's again, I've seen some wording on stuff where they use in like big cities, for example. I mean, they just immediately go to tear down, like record and tear down, do the photographic, you do the expensive photos and then you tear it down. And so I've seen lately people have started saying, don't automatically go to that as a mitigation measure, that you limit what happens with the building, that you don't allow somebody to just say, well, I'm building a neighborhood on this piece of property and there's this little old house. Why can't the little old house still sit there on a separate lot? And I've worked on a couple lately where they've done that. They've kept the house and lotted it off and then done other lotting, around it so that the house is preserved, and it's not an automatic thing that they all have to look the same. There can be an oddball in the bunch on the property. So, I mean, there are ways of doing it. So, and I think that's what you're asking about too, is how do you prevent stuff from just automatically going under being plowed under?
Yeah.
The town went through some changes to the depot. That depot used to have a loading dock on the east end, but it was not practical for us to be able to put it back there and do some of the things that the town wanted to do. So the town chose to make those changes. So it was a productive and good building for the town to be able to use and yet remember the historical character. In addition to that, we've got the other fruit sheds that are usable. They're occupied every day.
Mhm.
They're very much, you couldn't, I don't know if you would want to try to restore them to the original because they're very close to the original already. And so when I look at right in here, I'm saying, okay, do you make this so that we could actually have active new ideas to make this part of the community? Or do you just make it someplace that people walk by and look and say, oh yeah, I've been in there once and I'll probably never go back again? The go back again and the continued activity, I think, is the most important thing we can do with our historic buildings that we have in town.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot, because yeah, and it kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier about how can you bring that past and that history into the present and into the future and make it relevant. And there's a little bit of the City of Orange one that is kind of nice that I like too. I don't know if there's a way to include it or not, because it kind of again allows for not such a strict preservation, or that it meets the criteria of either state or national historic being listed. So kind of hints at that not every maybe building or we call them district may meet those criteria because they may not retain enough integrity to qualify, but yet that they're still important and they're still worth retaining their integrity that's still there in their sense of place. So I thought that was a nice element that Orange put in there, is because sometimes that is where it also can be that things get torn down, or the justification for them to be torn down is because, well, they don't have enough integrity, so down they have to go. It's okay. They're not really that worth it. But I kind of get the sense that in Loomis, people, may not really agree with that, or, if some of the integrity has been lost, is it really worth still saving? I of course would argue that yes, it would still be worth saving. So it was kind of a nice language that Orange put in there too, to kind of add a little bit more, because these are things where, if you have a battle about being able to save it or not, or people wanting to save it, and then someone who doesn't want to as the property owner, that's kind of where they end up focusing on, is, the integrity of the site or the building to justify not keeping it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the element of private property rights. It's sort of, you got to temper that in there too, that you can't tell people,
Sure.
Your life savings are invested in this piece of property, and you've always planned that eventually you would, when grandpa dies, you're going to do something with it. And that's your all of your money's invested in this. It's kind of finding that fine line where you're not dictatorial and saying you must preserve everything. You have to have some sense of standards and some sense of importance to it too. So it's got to be your local standards and your local, what is important on a local level. You can't just arbitrarily make, well, we like all old buildings that had to do with the fruit industry. So therefore any building related to that has to be saved. It can't be that broad. It has to be a little bit more fixed, but that's again, the standards to develop, that meet the desires of the community too.
So the goal that they have in, after that little discussion about that things may not be, meet the integrity criteria, is identify and preserve neighborhoods that are culturally and historically significant, but do not retain sufficient integrity for eligibility as a local, state, or national district. And then the policy would be to encourage identification and listing of neighborhood character areas within the city. And then to promote, the second goal is to promote community and visitor awareness and education concerning the unique and special history and architecture found in, they call them neighborhood character areas, because they couldn't be really deemed a historic district. So I just thought it was kind of interesting that they kind of, documented that you could still consider it as a town or a city historically significant, even though it doesn't meet all the criteria.
So
Well, that's-
Martha, early on you had your hand raised. Did you wish to add to this discussion?
No, I was back on the teeth and the when it is feasible, and I'm okay with how we ended the discussion.
Okay. And Stephanie, you typed a thing in the chat. What about updating the building so you can keep them, i.e., like from falling in on themselves or from termites or fires, like adding smoke detectors and updating them when needed so they will last? I see buildings that are falling apart like the old houses, but we can't touch them in order to keep them for the future.
What I was basically saying, and it's harder to type in that chat than actually express what I wanted to say. And I didn't be rude and like talk over people, but like I was going for a walk the other day, and I know that there's a lot of houses that once they become historical, we can't touch them. And I don't know if we've actually made this house historical, but I remember Paul Yacote, who used to live right on Taylor Road. I actually knew him growing up as a little kid, and I went to Delaware, and I was walking by his house, and I noticed that, for example, I don't know if somebody's living there now. I know at one point they were thinking about making that a historical landmark because he was so important to the town, but I noticed some of the boards were like kind of buckling. And that's just an example. I don't know if we're going to make that house a historical landmark or it has already been, but in terms of keeping these buildings, I think I know how sometimes people are kind of like, don't touch it, you can't touch it, to keep it the way it is, you know. But what I'm trying to say is you have to kind of update them to a point, like even like putting in a new, what is that board called? You can get at Home Depot, that's that section, just to protect it. Or like, you know, buildings get termites, you know, in order to keep them. Or, you know, like the rain comes and it destroys the roof. You have to do some updates when feasible. So that's all I was saying. Or like in an earthquake area, you might have to retrofit all the buildings so they're earthquake safe. Or the, what are the new smoke detectors we have to put in our houses now? The carbon monoxide versus just the regular smoke detector. You know, some of those things you have to add, I think, even to keep, you know, to preserve even the old buildings, to keep them safe. That's all I was saying.
And Michelle, you can unmute.
So I was just going to weigh in just a tiny bit, because here's the development reality, and maybe it's even something that you can put in here. So if you want to save buildings, the number one thing that you have to do is make sure they're occupied, because unoccupied buildings fall apart really fast, and then they very quickly get to the point where it is not economic to save them. So the most important thing you can do, and this is commercial and it's residential, is you have to keep buildings occupied. And it's just critical. So too much of our historic preservation strategies, you know, there's a carrot and a stick. And a lot of what we've used in historic preservation over the years has been a stick, which is we're going to not let you do anything with your property. And if you don't do it exactly to these rules. So what people do is they let them fall apart until the point where they can tear them down. It does not work very well. So I really like the carrot approach. I like to make sure that they're occupied. I like to make sure that they're as close to highest and best use as they can get. I am less picky when I'm in a place that is not a high sales per square foot district commercially, or if it's in a lower income neighborhood. I'm not going to be as picky about every finish being 100% super expensive, historically accurate. But you know what? If that neighborhood continues to improve, what they do is continue to improve that building, and it starts to get closer and closer to the way it was. Buildings are living structures. They're always changing. So even, you know, and Mary Beth just said that there are currently no buildings on the historic registry, but regardless, I completely agree. All the work that we did, everyone is very passionate about not losing more of your existing building stock downtown. And if you don't want that to happen, like the best thing you could do is make sure that it's all occupied. And so honestly, I think the city did a great job with its facade improvement program to help some of the long-term vacancies get their spaces occupied, right? And over time, those buildings are just going to get better and better and better. So thinking about historic preservation through that idea of keeping things occupied and incremental improvements, the kind of maintenance like that Stephanie was talking about, those are, you know, as long as they're standing and as long as they're being used, you got a lot more chance of saving them than if they're vacant and they're falling apart. So I think those are two really critical things with historic preservation. The third one is one that we talked about in another committee meeting, which is you have to look at the sea of expenses that make it hard to adaptively reuse existing buildings. And some of those are outside the city's control. It can be regional utilities, you know, it could be a private water district. They could assess new fire hydrant stuff that would make the project not accessible. So it's not, Ramona, it's not always about whether there's a lot of historic integrity in the building. It could be between your seismic code, your energy efficient code, and then dedications and a whole host of other things. It's just not economic to do it. And I do a lot of development work, and I do a ton of adaptive reuse work. And I will tell you that California has a reputation for being one of the hardest places in the country to complete adaptive reuse projects because they're just prohibitively expensive.
I kind of like that idea, Melinda, if we could put an implementation program about encourage the occupancy of existing buildings for their preservation.
Yeah, I think there's something definitely to adding that in too about again trying to, as much as possible, and there again that it's not. I think there's problems like Michelle said, you know, but again, encourage occupancy as a you know method, but again, sometimes it's like weighing those costs out. You know, you have to look at it both ways to a certain degree.
Yeah, one other thing that could possibly go in as an implementation measure maybe is this, but that the town, you know, would be a facilitator in trying to reduce those costs, because the town could go to the water district, the town could do some other things that might reduce the cost to make that happen. So I'm just thinking a measure that would encourage the occupancy and the town encouraging reduction of cost in order to preserve or to maintain that character.
I think
So,
Andrew's that's a really great way of putting it, because you're approaching it from two ends. So it's the cost reality, which is what Melinda is talking about. And then there's just buildings, like even a brand new building, if it's empty, like think about every house before the Great Recession that was abandoned in the suburbs that had just been built. They all just fall apart. You know, that's what buildings do when they're not occupied. So I think it's like approaching it from two different directions at the same time. But, you know, in a pinch, if I don't have a lot of resources, I'm in a community that doesn't have lots of money on the table, and there isn't quite as much as I can do to help mitigate the cost of preservation, then I just do everything I can to try and keep them occupied. Because if they're occupied, they're generally making money for somebody, and they're less likely to be torn down in the short term.
Yeah, and yesterday, Melinda, at one of the committees, it was discussed, I think, actually on the Taylor Road, and I think earlier today, the circulation, about changing the parking requirements for downtown so that buildings, you know, uses can be encouraged to go into those existing facilities. So that's one of the things that we can refer to eventually. I think Christie is a cross-reference to those elements about parking as a way to reduce costs.
So here, do we want to say the town shall encourage occupancy and, you know?
Yeah, occupancy to assure maintenance of the historic structures.
I wrote up something based on what we're saying. So I wrote, the town will encourage the occupancy of historic buildings to ensure maintenance and long-term preservation through facilitating fee reductions of local agency development fees. That doesn't sound good, but something along those lines.
Send those off to Melinda, and then again, we can wordsmith it.
Yeah.
Can you put that in the chat and I can just kind of paste it in here for now?
Yes, yeah. It needs a lot of work, but I'm sure,
Yeah.
I'm sure what everything is being said. Okay.
Thank you. Good contributions, everyone.
And I think we could say something about reducing parking requirements or things of that nature. I think that would help a lot to preserve those buildings.
Yeah, especially in the downtown core.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we want to be careful about, though, is that we don't, we at least get the life safety issues taken care of with, sensors and those kind of things that the fire department would require normally of a facility. The Blue Goose, we put in a whole fire alarm system and sprinkler system and everything else, and that was very, very expensive. But it was something that we initially didn't do. We put in a system that would work, but then when we got the money, we went ahead and finished it up. So there needs to be a way to be sure it's safe. And I mean, if we'd had fire system in our other building, if we'd had even smoke sensors in our other building, we could have probably saved. There was 3 fruit sheds down there. We would have probably saved at least 2 of them. So it's, we should encourage some sort of a safety, fire safety, access to that, to systems.
That get into another area to a certain degree, which is a good area of, requiring permits, that everybody has to have their permit showing that they've got all the equipment in place. I mean, is that something that there's a
I think
way to
does that, wouldn't that just more or less fall under regular, current building code? Or
It does, and the building
occupancy
code
certification?
Yeah, the building codes actually provide for historic buildings, and the building inspector, fire inspector have some discretion over what you can and can't do. I was in a historic community, always frustrated. The police wanted all glass buildings so they could see the perpetrators, and the fire wanted all concrete buildings so they could put out a fire. And it's like, we have buildings built in the 1800s. What are we going to do? So it's working with those agencies to get that done.
I guess could we say something like provide incentives to encourage occupancy of historic structures and support historic preservation or something like that as a, I don't know, policy or goal? Would something like that be, that the town would provide incentives to encourage occupancy and support historic preservation efforts?
Unfortunately, the town can work with others to do that, but given the financial situation, in the economic development element, we met yesterday and we're talking about policies to talk about how the town can work with others in achieving these things, because literally, when you have the town do something, it's Sean, Cricket, or Mary Beth. That's it. Those are your choices. And as you well know, they're really busy right now. So if anything, it's where we could, the other thing that came up, economic development, which is the town has taken a position where it will take a leadership role and direction role. So Sean will direct. And I think the example from Bonnie was Rick directed kind of what happened with the library, but doesn't, that's more the role they take. So Matthew's trying to craft a goal policy that talks about how the town can take a leadership, but it doesn't mean they're funding it. It doesn't mean they're actually doing it. And I think that's the case here also. So maybe what we do is make a note, Melinda, that we take a look at the economic elements, see if we can tie into that. It's a cross-reference to the ability of the town to do these things.
Yeah.
Just a comment, because I don't know if it's appropriate or not, or if this was kind of an older style of general plan that you could include it in, but it was interesting that City of Orange actually included library services in their cultural resources section as part of, I guess, kind of like the educational component of the town's or the city's history. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. So I don't know if it's appropriate at all in this day and age anymore. It seems like it's a little bit older.
It could be that the library, I mean, you have the Historic Society, but also the library could be the keeper. So maybe something that references both of those, because the library definitely is in the facilities element. But that would be that would be maybe a place that they can be the keeper of the history.
Mhm. Okay, I mean, because their goal under which library services is putting cultural resources meet the educational, cultural, civic, information, recreation, business, and lifelong learning needs of residents through the provision of library resources. So that's their goal. So I don't know if it's appropriate to put something like that in or not, but it kind of struck me that, yeah, our library has the component with the historical board. The Loomis Basin Historic Society is, kind of contracted, if you will, kind of with the library to have stuff in there. So I don't know, just a thought. I thought it was interesting that they included that kind of more as the education and component, I guess, kind of to the cultural resources to add an extra element to the education part.
Yeah. Oh, sorry for interrupting, but it's again how you define cultural resources. I mean, originally it could mean again the arts committee up here calls itself doing things with cultural resources. So it kind of is a cross purposes. And again, maybe getting back to definitions. What do we define as a cultural resource? Do we get into libraries that are covered elsewhere? Do we get into events the community holds? Those are cultural events. And so it's kind of like, do you want to draw a tight line or just put it all in there? And again, it would almost have to be by definition too. What are you calling a cultural resource? To me, I work in cultural resources management, so it's things, the sites, buildings, structures, that kind of stuff. So that's how I look at it, and it's probably the most common modern use of the term. But you're right. I mean, you could put the library is intimately involved in this. I went on my visit and realized that that's where a lot of the stuff is stored, a lot of the information. So it's something to think about.
One of the things we're going to have add to each implementation measure is who's doing it and when is it going to be done. So it's one opportunity, Melinda, to put that in, that it's the town in cooperation with the library or something like that. So
Yeah. Okay.
that may be the appropriate way to do it.
Okay.
We may also want to look at just the next couple of policies and implementation measures before we get to the next objective. We might find that some of this stuff is touched upon on those.
Good idea.
Okay. So I think we're next policy is encourage reuse and revitalization of historic buildings. And again, that there's a lot of ways to go with that. How does it happen? Whether and again, demolition, prohibiting demolition is the next policy, I guess, that was inserted in there. Okay.
Could you scroll up, Mary Beth?
Yeah. Okay. So these are there's a lot of ways of doing this. I mean, what constitutes a historic building still sort of needs to be defined. Are you talking about anything old? Are you talking about anything on your inventory? Are you talking about your, what standards you're setting? So again, I think we probably need a little bit more definition in there too. And again, moving to, okay. I'm just sort of, we move policy, implementation, again, offer flexibility in development standards to developers working with properties. That's something that, again, putting it on a local level if we can and changing it. Now we're.
Did I go too far?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
So, and again, anything we want added here? I mean, is this okay, or the way it's written?
Martha?
This policy H-1.1.3, aesthetically valuable, that is really a vague notion. I don't know what that means. I think the whole thing should be like Melinda was saying, get a definition going and refer to it throughout this section. But aesthetically valuable, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one because obviously aesthetics are in the eye of the beholder. So, it's again, that may be where you get back into what meets the standards of the community as being important,
Right.
and I think that may be a better way of wording it, perhaps something to do with historically defined as by the standards. I mean, that gives you another level of protection in there.
Get the standards written in there though. You're going to have a list of all of the historic things that are considered historic, or they'll keep being added to through the years though, as my house starts to fall down and get old. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know whether you want to say just demolition is limited, or is it demolition and alterations, or
alteration.
Again, I'm not sure. And that could be just temporary, we'll work on it, but again, there's demolition implies the whole thing goes and it's gone. Do we, there's ways of keeping portions of buildings too.
Yeah, that's
Maybe you could take out
Yeah,
demolition and just have alteration. Demolition sounds pretty
Or
drastic.
Demolition is
Or-
definitely hardcore.
Yeah, hardcore.
Like it's
Yeah.
last resort, like you can't.
I
do
mean, or
anything with
maybe
it.
kind of draw to, significant alteration, because some alteration is probably
Oh
going to be
yeah,
fine, but you may not want to
course, what is
drastically
significant?
alter it.
for now, I think that's a better than demolition.
In
So,
some cases, just to meet ADA, you're going to have significant alterations.
right, and you can't hide them all either. I mean, it's going to change the appearance. So,
This goes back to Russ's point about the train depot, the loading dock. If that was still there, how would we get into the building unless you had stairs and ADA compliant? So you would have to alter the building. But if we don't own the building, how strong is it? I mean, like you said, aesthetically valuable or to be historically valuable. What's the legal definition if you're talking to a property owner that says, hey, I have big plans and that building is not part of it? And you say, well, I like the way it looks.
No, that's really that's really qualitative. I would really get rid of the aesthetically valuable.
Yeah, I think you temporarily strike that out maybe, and we'll look for something else there.
Yeah.
Just to put a strikeout through it for the moment, we'll find something else to put in there.
Historically.
A good example of that is over at the fire department. We had planned on doing an expansion to be able to put our fire trucks in a building, and there's a training quarters over there that we use, and there was some concern that it was something that should have been saved, and we actually had a consultant went through and talked about gave us a rendition of when the house was built and what might be a value there. And the final interpretation was that there was basically nothing that was just a standard house, and there was nothing of value there that we should try to save it. We even tried to get somebody to move it, and nobody would move it. So, what do you do if you have a place, nobody will move it? Somebody's got to tear it down to be able to put a building on. So you know, it's kind of a catch-22 sometimes,
Mhm.
but you do need something to at least bring it to attention and take a closer look.
And it needs to be looked up, looked at up front as part of, what's on a property. When you do your cultural resource study, you identify it and evaluate it. And again, using whatever standards there are, you evaluate it depending on who's in charge. And again, there are things that need to be demolished. I 100% agree. And there's other stuff that gets demolished that maybe shouldn't be, so I think it's important to have your standards of what you think, is important to you. So, okay. And then again, implementation, flexibility, and development standards are consistent with the building code. And again, I think, it's that fine line all the time of walking, sort of on this balance beam, on each side. So I think that's true. And like I said, there are going to be things that people disagree about too. I mean, this is part of it too, is that you're going to have some people love certain types of architecture and other people could care less. I mean, I find myself, I'm very uninterested in what they are now calling mid-century modern, which were, 50s houses that were sort of, to me, like some of the design elements are ugly, the colors are ugly, and people like mid-century light fixtures and mid-century, this sells for huge amounts of money. I mean, there's a difference of opinion. I wouldn't be interested in saving it, but that's my own personal aesthetic. But if your community decided that, yes, kids today love mid-century. And I mean, to me, it was sort of growing up, that was sort of like, kind of like tacky leftover stuff, and something like the hammered plates that people had and other stuff just does not appeal to me. But I agree, there's people, yeah, it is. There's just something about it to me that reminds me of like, the stuff you saw on Mad Men or whatever, it's like, ugh, but so that again, there's always going to be disagreements. And so that's why it's setting the standards of what time period you're interested in, what styles you're interested in. I mean, maybe everybody needs to keep a 50s house or something so everybody can see the ugliness of the era, but that's me. So sorry. Anyway, so that again is getting back to setting your standards of what you want and what you think. I mean, is it better to go for the 1890s houses? I mean, when you're talking about residential stuff, is that what's of interest? Again, it it's something for everybody to think about and have input in. Okay, next objective is something that's sharing the history. I mean, we're kind of looping.
Stephanie has her hands up. Just a minute. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
I just wanted to kind of jump on that and say, coming from somebody who lives, well, I'm 2 years older than 1950. My house is from 1948, and we had to significantly update it just so I could move in. There were things that needed to be fixed. So coming from a younger person, I appreciate more colonial and older houses that actually are more historical than mid-century modern, because there's a lot of stuff that might be mid-century that's kind of tacky and it has to be torn down or updated just so you can actually appreciate the house and not be embarrassed of it. So there are people of my generation that agree with you guys that we'd rather focus on older houses that are actually more historical and worthwhile saving than aluminum roofs, tacky, what is it, that's on the walls you tear down and just paint, stuff like that, or like really small hallways or really short ceilings. Stuff like that is, yeah. So just to put that out there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. Moving along, we're sort of back again to the idea of sharing the history of the town with residents and tourists. And so this is kind of linking it all together of putting the focus on history and using the history to, for people to share. And how do we do it? I mean, and again, we talked about trying to include underrepresented populations associated with the town. Again, mainly the Asian residents, first the Chinese, which a huge percentage of the population in the early years with the mining. And then, of course, later on, the Japanese that came and worked and settled in the region. So again, I think this is really one that is sort of, we talked about an open-ended system. This is one that people can approach it many different ways. And I think personalize it to a certain amount, because we know the names of the families, we know the names of the different people who were here. We can't really get at the Chinese so much, but we can with the Japanese, who a lot of them did take up, land holdings in this area. And again, we've got the associations with, of course, with the Methodist Church and the early people that were involved with the Methodist Church. And I think, working from there and what they've already done, I went and toured that too, and what they've already done with their Japanese gardens and walkways and that, I think there's a lot to be done here with this, with this policy of trying to do as much as possible. And again, there was a comment received about how the church is planning something for the anniversary of the interment order next year. And again, that's something that, like we talk about, interpreting the bad part of this too, that, there were families that people were kind to and preserved everything and made sure that they came back and had a ranch to go to and help them out. And there were other people that were taken advantage of and lost their property as a result of being and again incarcerated essentially during the war. So again, for implementation, this is this is where I get to hoping that we'll do the inventory here. And I think this is really important that all these places be documented, whether the ranches that we know were ranches that were owned by Japanese families, trying to involve school groups as much as possible, trying to involve local historians and anybody else who's willing to work on an inventory of what's in town. I mean, it's sort of like, I want to go see my great grandmother's house. I have in my mind that was a little old place that was probably about 1910. I want to see if I have any accurate memories, but all of this stuff, again, this is where you create your set of standards for listing. This is where you come up with what's important to you and what can get in here. It doesn't have to be the California Register standards that you meet. You can set up your own standards. And again, when you run through stuff, being on a local inventory does afford a certain amount of protection when you're working your way through. That wording is in there too. So it becomes real important to do. And it's a whole lot of work. I mean, before anybody thinks that this is something that would just snap your fingers. First of all, it's hard to get people committed to doing this. It's hard to get it set up in the first place. And it's again, it's getting people to stick with it, to be excited about doing it and to, either do it thematically, perhaps do it by type of building, do, commercial buildings, do, pick something to work on first and then move through it. There's a lot of different ways to go with this. And again, you've got to do a lot of things. I mean, I don't think people understand how time-consuming archival research is. If you've ever done any of that, sometimes I can take and spend a whole day of my time looking up original facts about a place and looking up all the details, who owned it, who was there, who did it go to, what activities were occurring. All of those are now available online. You can figure this out from sitting in your office. Part of it, you do have to go do research, but putting it together, it could take me a day's worth of research, may write down into a single page. And I mean, again, it's tough work, and it's tough to get people to do this kind of work of the archival study. And you need to be accurate about what you're putting into your inventory and why. But it's trying to involve everybody you can. And I would probably also add into this the Placer County Archives too, as a to the degree possible. So this is going to be the one. And I don't know whether you start by writing your standards of what you should have in it, and what kind of forms you're going to use. Are you going to create new forms? Are you going to have there's lots of examples of types of forms you can use. You can use the one that archaeologists use. You can use all kinds of forms. But this is really to me, is kind of the key here. And then I went ahead and started listing some of the places and some of the things to look at. And some of it may be totally utilized by your, the local historical society may have done all this. But I keep running across stuff in my own library and in my map collection that I've found. For example, somebody said, oh yeah, there's a Sanborn map. Well, there's actually 3 different years of Sanborn maps. And I don't know if people have found the other years or not. I'm not quite sure, because you don't have maps in your library. You don't have historic maps kept there. And so maybe this is something to do too, of get some of the graphic sources collected. And like I said, I mentioned in one of my drafts of this, there's a wonderful bird's eye view drawn from up at the top at Newcastle, and it shows looking all the way to Sacramento and looking at the trains and looking at your community in I think it's 1893. All of those things have a place. They can be used in interpretive signage. They can be used to explain why things are the way they are or what they looked like at different times. So again, I would probably encourage somebody to start looking at getting a way of maybe the library can have a case of maps. But again, so you run through, and there are, we've got the library mentioned here. We've got what they've got that I know of just from my visit, but maybe that's a place to create a collection of other sources too. And again, this is all expandable. I don't know if anybody spent time at the California State Library, because that's got a lot of stuff that is, I've made copies. That's part of my library, was making copies from their library. But there's a few things that the California State Archives, there's other places to go outside the community that whenever they open up again, that are good, good for finding out more. Newspaper indexes, all that kind of stuff. Put in Loomis as a topic in your newspaper index and see how many articles you've got. You may get some great stories out of it. You may get some other great information, like the article on the bridge. I mean, that was really a nice find. So again, this is just sort of my history side coming through of what my favorite thing to do is site-specific history. Whenever I can get a job, I'm doing some barns right now in Manteca, and it's really interesting to try to figure out, what went on at the place, and figure out the details of it. And so again, this is something that is kind of a fun thing to do. And then go out and visit the building and record it, take your photos. Again, that's a good part of it is photo documentation. So so this is my suggestion of kind of the keystone of a lot of this is getting your inventory done. And you may be able to save things by putting them into your inventory. If they meet your standards, put them into your inventory. So, okay. So scroll down, I think.
So what I added to the implementation measure at the top was a reference by Russ Kelly to include the South Placer Heritage Foundation. So if there's no cause to worry about that inclusion, we will scroll down.
So, and then we put in, you had mentioned the fire department, Russ had mentioned, and so we included that, online newspapers. And I'm not sure if what the church has got in terms of, they've done a lot of interpretive work, and I don't know whether they've got other archives, other materials. But it's sort of a wide open I mean, I would look at this as being the grandest opportunity for putting people together and working together at creating this inventory. I think it's really sort of exciting to do, and something that I think is really extremely important to move ahead.
Ramona?
Yeah, I just have a question. If you would happen to know of any like grants or organizations that might help fund some of this inventory, either research or even acquisition, say like maps and things like that, or even to help fund producing an inventory, you know, whether it's just a historic building inventory where you can go around and have people be trained and fill out forms for the buildings. But I mean, I don't know if the money's dried up, but long ago, that was one of my jobs, was to go through this little tiny town or two in Colorado. And that was my whole job, was to go through and document these historic buildings that people said, this is historic, these are historic. And that was my job.
Yeah,
Is
it
to go
used
through
to
'em.
be the State Office of Historic Preservation used to, you know, help out and help people with this and encourage inventories. And they're so overwhelmed right now. I doubt, I mean, with having their office closed for all this time, I don't even know if there's money still in any of those programs. And I think it's more of a volunteer effort. I think it may be some fundraising in part to get, like say, a case at the library to put your maps in or whatever. I think there's some of that. Maps, a lot of them are online now. A lot of the stuff's online. This is the other part. I for years, you know, had an assistant that I sent down to the state library all the time, and I tell him, go here, get this, photograph this. These days, I'm finding a lot of this stuff. The Library of Congress has a lot of this stuff online. There's ways of getting the Sanborn maps online. I mean, all of this stuff I do now online. I don't, unfortunately for my guy, I don't hire him much anymore because I can do it all myself, just sitting here. So, but I think this is really things to tackle. You know, I'm not sure. And a lot of times, I mean, what I've discovered in the past about trying to get grants is you spend so much time, it's hours and hours and hours of putting together a grant proposal. For the little bit of money, you'd almost be better standing with a can. I told somebody this about a cemetery preservation project. You'd be better if you stood on the street in front of the Placerville Cemetery and held out a can and asked for donations. You'd probably make more with that use of your time than trying to write up the proposal to get the money and then doing the back end work of, you know, supporting how you spent the money. I think you'd be better off just asking for it. So that, I mean, that's my opinion now. I mean, I look at, you know, grant programs, and in fact, my husband was involved in some of this stuff too, and he gave me his grant book and said, take a look at it. You want to do this? And I went, no, I don't think so. You know, so yeah. And I think, you know, this, you get a $500 grant, that doesn't go very far in today's world. And you've put in tons of hours to get the $500 grant if you're lucky. So that if there's somebody that's a grant writing person, maybe there's somebody that's got a lot of experience at it. I think it's better to go to either local business people, community movers and shakers, you know, have an event. I mean, that you know, you could make a little bit of money on and ask for it. So
Michelle, you have a comment?
This is a little bit of a side note. With the amount of CARES Act funding that's going to be flooding into the states and then local jurisdictions, there's going to be this one-time opportunity. And I think that this is, again, sort of a side note, but I think that rural communities and Anders, I don't know if you've kind of heard anything, but you know, it would make sense for rural communities to try and get together and say, from an economic development perspective, we would like some of those monies to go to rural communities for adaptive reuse of existing structures that we want to, you know, see preserved. Because definitely some of those monies need to be used for COVID recovery and economic development. So it might be might be possible to use for housing, especially if there was an affordable element, but also for economic development and COVID recovery in the downtown. You might be able to tie those things together. There might be a one-time opportunity to get a chunk of money. And I know that some different jurisdictions that will be getting piles of that money are already sort of panicking about how am I going to distribute, like hundreds of millions of dollars across like these regions and cities and towns. And so that might be something to think about on a broader basis. There's going to be kind of this one-time opportunity to maybe access some money in significant amounts. So just worth thinking about.
Okay. That's interesting to me. That's far beyond any knowledge I have. So, I mean, if there is a pile of money to be had and somebody is willing to put the time in to get it, that's great. So, and then again, another way of we're going back to implementing what we're going to do about, ways of interpreting your town for visitors and also for the citizens is to develop interpretive signage at locations of former sites, current locations of important buildings and structures. Again, interpret the WPA at the WPA bridge. Features where, anything happened that's important. And again, rather than necessarily creating signs, which is expensive and they get vandalized and there's all kinds of things, you can do something, you can make signs. I mean, I was looking at the cost of them the other day for some cemetery work I was involved in, and boy, it's pricey. And again, maybe doing something with a QR code. Those are a lot cheaper to buy those little things in signage and use those with people's phones to link the text to it. And that also is an easier way if you make a blunder in your interpretation or something's wrong with the text of it, you certainly can change it easier with a link to a site on online text.
So the Chamber of Commerce has a QR code system for the interpretive signs, the packing labels that are on buildings and things like that.
Oh, okay.
So rather than us develop a program, maybe we could tie into what they've got going on and keep it on the chamber end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like a real good way to go. Somebody's already got the system. If you can link to that, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think that now people are they don't even look. I've gone to museums a few times where they take pictures of everything there and don't even look at the signage or the item. They're taking pictures to show they were there, looking at the actual, looking at the exhibit. And so I kind of think you've got to do something with telephones. So, that's why I think a QR code is probably safer than, long paragraphs of text that people may not read anyway. Or they take a picture of it, I guess, and read it later. So, and then the final one I had here was the trying to develop a school program for local history for third grade students. Again, trying to meet the state educational standards for local history. That's the year you do it. And again, this, if you can involve the children also in the signage or lead them to the signs, walk out and go look at the signs, or encourage people to work on this. But I think if you get kids young, I think it's a really good idea. I think I mentioned at one prior meeting that we had a program at our high school, Oak Ridge High, and very successful with getting people to do interpretive write-ups. And their junior year, they had gave talks and wrote up some local history. And again, we got them to give us ancestry.com for free for a year, and people could look up, learn how to use that and write about local history. So again, I'm thinking third grade is a good starting point, but if somebody's willing to push it in the high school, it kind of depends on the teacher. But we had a real progressive guy at our school that liked this program, and we did that for a couple of years. So So again, those are my ideas. And again, I don't know that it's going to work, you know, if these are going to work for you, but those are my ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to involve the students more. And we do have close ties to our high school. And I believe there are some teachers that would be interested in that because history is so important. And I also like the idea of the QR code. And I'm learning more about that because I'm always been the history guy that stops at the site. I see a historical marker 1 mile ahead, and then I pull over, and my wife and son were always like, come on, Dad.
Take a picture, yeah.
But now you can, have this information, on the phone and everything. So I think that's some great ideas, actually.
Christy, in public facilities for the library, is there something related to this there? As far as the library doing educational anything with students or
No, it's more about the facilities itself.
Okay.
I did make some changes to implementation measure H 1.1.2.2 based on the work the chamber is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in the chat if you want to see that text. And change the text how you see fit.
Copying and pasting is so nice.
Yes.
Amazing.
So that's everything, Melinda, the historic elements. I guess the question of the committee, is there anything that wasn't covered that should be covered in the historic element? And like somebody said, we all go home at night, 3 in the morning, wake up and come up with new ideas. So continue to submit ideas. But I think, this is pretty much what we've been discussing the whole time this committee's been meeting. So it's good.
Yeah, I think it looks good. And if someone does come up with a 3 o'clock in the morning idea, we can still submit those comments, right?
You can submit the comments. It could be, it may not go to this committee or this team, but it will go to the planning commission. And after that, it will go on to the council. So we have I'm thinking about a year to go. So comments can come in for the next year. And
Thank you,
Michelle,
Michelle. Bye-bye.
Hi, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. Anyone else on the committee?
I think we need to think about it overnight. I was thinking about the schools and the 3rd grade. I'm in charge of a program that the Lions Club has, and it's to educate the 3rd grade kids about the American flag.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extremely hard to get 45 minutes at every classroom in the Loomis School District in Penman or Newcastle to get time that the teachers will let you have to educate them just about the American flag. I think we might be better off if we try to educate through the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts program. The Boy Scouts are always looking for a Eagle project. And I think we might be able to incorporate some of this into Eagle projects to help do that. And then they're actually supporting it. And most of them are not in high school yet. So, some of it could carry into the high school, but that might be a good opportunity.
So you're saying they for the school program or for working on the inventory and signage?
The school program will be extremely hard to get time from the 3rd graders. I have trouble every year getting my people scheduled and go in and do the classroom stuff. And the some of the I don't know what they call the other school, but they won't even let you in the classroom. So it's from trying to get out there and get a school program might be hard. It might be easier to get the Boy Scouts and maybe even the Cub Scouts, but I think the Boy Scouts might be a better access to be able to promote some of this stuff and even come up with ideas for a for an Eagle project that they actually get done. And it may be just that they take a piece of what we want to do and just complete that. Maybe they'll do the research, and maybe they'll do, something to help us complete. They're free labor and they're smart kids, and they, once they're taught a few basics, they could probably find out much more about history around here than we might even. So it might be and I read. Have you ever heard of the Foxfire books?
No.
There's some books called the Foxfire books, and I think it was down in Tennessee, Louisiana, somewhere down there. One of the English teachers decided that he wanted something that would be productive for the kids to do. So what he did was he had all the kids go out and talk to their older relatives or the older people and find out how they did things. And they had a lot of, I think there's 9 Foxfire books. And they'll teach you how to make a bucket. They'll teach you how to make a greenhouse. They'll teach you how to garden, how to do those things. And it was a production that the English teacher did. And when he got all the information from the kids, he put them in books, and then he took the money to put into his program. But there may be an opportunity to get some kids involved in doing something like that, just taking a piece and following it through, and maybe they might need some guidance, which I think we could probably get from the library. We have probably one of the best libraries around. So I think with the Historical Society and people there, we can help educate those kids, and they'll do it for us. And I might qualify as a Eagle Scout project.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea for the Eagle Scouts project, but I still think that the 3rd grade students, if they have a local history requirement,
They do.
maybe hard to get into the classroom. But I think a field trip, right down from the Loomis Elementary School, or I don't know if they have school buses in Loomis Unified School District anymore, but a bus trip to the fruit sheds and going through there, and you could incorporate what did the fruit packing people do? How did they make crates instead of a bucket? Maybe they were picking with fruit baskets. We would find out more of the history of hands-on things that the 3rd graders could do. I can understand, like, the teachers might want to get the kids out of the classroom every now and then, right?
Well, the teachers have to fulfill their requirement for doing some of the teaching at different levels, and by you offering to take over and teach them specifically what they get credits for. The teachers get credits for teaching local history, state history, U.S. history at certain levels. You're essentially doing their work for them for 45 minutes or whatever by teaching a program like that. So again, it's what you want to do. I think the Eagle Scouts could certainly, or the Boy Scouts could certainly be involved. Most of the projects they do for Eagle Scouts are building something. Like we have them in our cemetery programs up here where they build benches or they build different things, but they really aren't, most of them are not sophisticated enough to do the signage or do the text that's needed, or to follow through in the history. It's mostly build something for community use. And so I mean, certainly they can be involved in helping, create language, but it can't be, they can't do it on their own, especially because they're mostly like, 14, 15, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
But
I do.
I think that language is good too. The appropriate organizations to provide a school program. And again, if none of the teachers want to take anybody up on it, then they don't get the school program. I mean, it's just something that it's one way of trying to get children interested at a young age. And again, the more you can, get them involved in it at at a younger age, I think it's better personally, but
Well, I think if you look at the one of our kiosk places right over by the bank, that about the fruit labels, and you would see that it was made by the FFA at the high school and the welding shop. They put all that together, and that's another place where we might be able to fund the materials and get the kids to do it. They really are talented. Del Oro Welding Shop and FFA program is extremely good.
Yeah.
And I'm an advisor to them too.
Well,
Okay, so are we at, we've had our discussion, and what is the next steps, or confirm subcommittee recommendation to conservation? Am I getting ahead of myself, or are we there yet?
We're there.
We're there.
Okay, so let me know what you want from us.
We'd like actually the committee to recommend that this document be updated for direction tonight and submitted to the Conservation Committee for incorporation into the Conservation chapter. And this would be the last meeting of this committee until there's a purpose to have the meeting again.
Okay, so we need a motion for that lengthy statement there, Anders, or what?
Yes, you do. It would be great to have a motion to recommend that Belinda and the town team make the modifications to the historic element as discussed at tonight's meeting, and forward that on to the Conservation Committee for incorporation into the conservation element.
I would make that motion.
Got here a second?
I just have a question. We went through the volume 1, volume 3. Are we going to come back and work on that again, or volume 3, the cultural resource section?
Yeah, the settings section. Actually, that was the first thing we went through, and I thought we were done with that, though I know information continues to come in and Melinda continues to update it. Is that something you felt the committee needed to review again? Because we could pass on this document, and if you felt we needed to meet additionally to go through that.
That would probably be best.
You think so?
Yeah.
Which part are you talking about?
The settings section where it talks about the history of Loomis in volume 3.
And where is that on the settings?
It's in the settings section, volume 3 of the general plan.
Separate from the policies.
Yes, it's separate from the policies. Yeah. Remember, we're using the settings section not only for the general plan, but for the environmental impact report. That's why it's separate. And the other thing about that, realize with the policies here, the town can only update these 4 times a year. With the settings section, because it is not part of the general plan per se, we can update that as often as we want. So it really becomes as Melinda said, a living document that can be updated as appropriate. And hopefully it will be, especially with each environmental impact report. But Martha, were there things that you wanted to review that you haven't reviewed yet?
I was just a little concerned about the paleontology section, but because I guess Melinda, you're going to rewrite that?
Yeah, no, and like I said, I appreciate you pointing that out. I was using the ancient map and now that there's more studies done, we're gonna upgrade and include that.
That was your dad's map?
Yeah, my dad was an engineering geologist.
It was Will Peak, I bet.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
How
that's
cool is
him.
that?
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
a good guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
safety of dams.
Mm-hmm.
Built a lot of dams.
Yeah, Seismic Safety Commission too later, so.
Yeah.
So what, does the whole committee want to review that work, or should Melinda and Martha work with it? Give the committee could give direction to Melinda and Martha and the town team to update the settings section, and then Martha, if you would review it, that's another approach.
Yeah, I think David was interested in it too.
Okay.
David Ring.
But the other thing we could do is, I know, Melinda, you're getting ready to update it. We could send the settings section out to the entire committee, ask for comments.
Oh,
And after reading it and getting comments, if you feel a meeting of the committee should be held, then we'll hold a committee meeting.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's
Okay.
go ahead and send that out, because I think it looks like Melinda, Martha, and I'm sure David, you're all on the same page of what you want, to update on that. And it is going to come to the Conservation and Resources Committee as well.
And this committee is going to be invited to that committee also.
Right.
And I'm on that committee, so
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
kind of,
As am I.
Yeah.
that's right.
So I think we're probably covered.
I would be comfortable with that if the rest of the committee is.
Martha, was there a specific policy you wanted to see related to paleontology?
Just the paleontology in Loomis. It has a nice discussion about what paleontology is, but it doesn't have the
So it's in the
anything
settings
about
section,
Loomis.
settings section only, Christy.
Yeah, I'm just asking if, in addition to the updates to the setting, where we can reference the soils map that's in figure 7-1 in the safety section, if you wanted to talk about any policy or objective language here related back to
No.
paleontology. Okay,
Nothing, no. This is great what we went through today.
perfect.
good.
Okay, so knowing that we're going to continue with some work, and it will be sent on to the Conservation Resources Committee, which several of us sit on. Maybe we could go ahead and, Anders, what was that again you said?
Hold it, Carol, did you take down my words? It's not, you know what Carol does is she goes back and she watches the YouTube to get the words just correct.
So, I'm going to say something along the line of that you recommend that we update the settings and policies as discussed in tonight's meeting, with some added input from a subsequent meeting with Miriam and Melinda and David Ring, that we submit this document to the umbrella Conservation of Resources Committee for incorporation into the the Conservation of Resources setting.
That's it. Thank you, Carol.
Okay.
Does that sound good, Andreas?
Yes, that'll work.
So we have a motion from Russ. Do we have a
And-
second?
And that's a
second.
revised motion.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
Russ, let's second that. Do you make a motion for that revised motion?
I do.
I'll second.
Very good.
Stephanie seconded, okay. Okay, Jeff Duncan,
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Yes.
Martha Merriam,
Yes.
and Russ Kelly.
Yes.
Okay, good work.
Okay.
Thank you. You guys have been just really great. Thank you.
Well, we have a good team here, I think. Everybody's interested in the same subject. And I believe that this was an interesting committee. I almost said class because I learned a lot. I learned a lot more about Loomis history. And I think that we pretty much went through everything here. Are there any, well, I know there's no more public comment because I don't see any public out there unless there's a direct line to Mary Beth.
I think now Mary Beth has some updates.
Oh, okay, very good.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One thing we kind of talked about was comments. Comments for committees will end on June 30th, but comments received after that will be forwarded to, if the committee, the umbrella committee is still meeting, they will get those comments. Once they make their recommendation to the planning commission, comments received at that point will then forward to the planning commission. Once the document is forwarded from the planning commission to the council, comments received at that point will forward to the council. So, when we say we're closing comments, it doesn't really mean we're closing comments. We will still accept comments, clear up until the end, and approval of the environmental documents and everything. So that's one thing. The other thing is we have 2 public input workshops planned for this month. The first one is on June 15th at the Blue Goose from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the second one will be on a Saturday, June 19th at the Depot from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Both of these meetings are in person. We're trying to encourage public input on the elements as they are drafted and whatever their current state of committee finalization is, to present those forward for people that don't necessarily participate via Zoom or haven't been involved. We're trying to stir up some additional public input. Those meetings will be live streamed to YouTube. They will not be a Zoom format at all. It's, we really want people to attend. And this afternoon, we posted everybody received this afternoon the monthly status report. And we ask you to kind of review that. It's a document that's included in each council package for council members, so that they know the work that we're doing on a monthly basis. But we encourage everybody to look at it and know where we're at this point in time. Page 10 of that document kind of outlines the committees and our estimation of when they'll be wrapped up and moving on and that kind of thing. But even once your committee, I think Andy referred to this earlier, even with your committee wrap up, like we're doing tonight, we will continue to encourage you to participate in the umbrella committee to be able to follow your work forward, and still be able to make comment as a committee member to the umbrella committees, and wrap up those umbrella committees and get these things. There's a lot of work to do between the time the committees wrap up and we actually present draft documents to the planning commission. So, throughout the whole process, and maybe it's misery loves company, but we're in it for the long haul. And we want you to stay engaged and make sure that we're doing what you want us to, what your direction has been. So follow it all the way through, not only the umbrella committees, but the planning commission and the council, clear up to adoption as much as you're comfortable with participating. Anywhere along the way you see something it needs to be fixed, you send it to us. We'll take care of it, any kind of adjustments or anything. So I think that was my recap.
Thanks, Mary Beth. And
Betcha.
again, I want to thank everybody who's participated in this committee, and we'll be seeing many of you at the umbrella committee, as well as hopefully at the open houses at the Blue Goose. It's one of my favorite places, Russ. And I have nothing else. It looks like we've covered everything pretty well tonight. So I believe it's time that we call this meeting adjourned
Oh,
9 or 8:59 p.m.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
thanks, everybody.
Good work.
Great,
you.
great job.
We used every bit of our 2 hours.
Thank you, Melinda.
Okay, thanks to all.
By the way, I am on vacation
No,
for those meetings. See you later.
This is vacation. You love this stuff.
Yeah, I checked today and I was not sure about all my committees. I'm on 8 committees.
Oh my gosh. Well, see what you ask for it, you get it, huh?
But no, everything is done. It's a great job. I really like the way they're putting it together. I think it's a significant benefit to the town and, to who we are.
Yep.
So,
No, I think it's important work, definitely. And I think it's been really good experience. Some people might, be a little, questioning like, why so much work on this? And well, it is an important document. It is the constitution of, the town, basically. So we need it to be done properly.
well, this is supposed to last till 2040. I think I'll be 100 then.
Yeah. Well, I hope we all last till 2040. We'll let some youngsters do it next time.
You guys take it easy.
You too.
We'll see you.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Bye, Jeff. Bye, Russ.
Bye.